welcome you guys all in here today, and I just want to take the moment to acknowledge that we are here today on unceded Syilx territory in the North Okanagan, one of the communities that the Okanagan Indian Band as well as WFN, West Bank First Nations, we share responsibility within this territory. So just want to welcome you all here today. I think we're going to let Akbal start us out and give you a bit of history.
Yeah, thank you for having us today. We're really appreciated that we could speak here today. I'm just going to give a quick history on how this all became about. The City of Vernon and Okanagan Indian Band used to have community forums. Once a year, we used to get together and just talk about what we'd like to see in our communities. But that's what it amounted to, was just talk. There was no real initiative to move forward and try to get some of these plans and visions we had to reality. So we decided that how could we do this, and we entered in this Community Economic Development Edition. We're going to call it SETI, just for all you know, so I don't have to keep saying that long phrase, but SETI. And through CANDO, which is the national Indigenous organization that's involved in the community economic development, we had two ladies come out, Marissa Lawrence and Helen Patterson, and work with us and see what we could actually accomplish. This started in December of 2017 with our first meeting. We got together with Okanagan Indian Band Council, our council, and we wanted to learn about the history of both communities. The first thing we found was the history of Vernon was about 125, 130 years. The Okanagan Indian Band history was thousands of years. So when you're planning your history and writing it down on a large wall, it looked kind of strange to us to go, wow, this is something that we don't understand. And we need to learn about First Nations first before we move forward. We decided that we'd go through, in our second meeting, what we called the CARIS blanket exercise. And what we do in this blanket exercise is we learn about how First Nations were on this land and how they were treated. Wasn't very good. It was eye-opening for a lot of our council members. You know, it's upsetting at times because I put the phrase to many people I know now and I say, well, how would you feel if someone came in and we'll use it, took your house and they told you had to go live over there? You might not like it, but if that's what they did, you'd have to do it. Then what would you do if they said, you know what, we're going to take your kids? Now what do you do? And over the time period, you start to see your culture disappear. And that was the most eye-opening thing, is the culture starts to disappear. And then once kids are given back and you try to grow, well, you have all these other issues where government has just said, okay, we did what we had to do. We'll leave you there. Doesn't work. It wouldn't work for anybody in this room. So, you know, working together is about learning about each other first, and that's what we did. We learned about each other and what we want to see. And living within the same area, and you know, Vernon's a part of a regional district as well. We got Coldstream, electoral area B and C. We have to learn to work together, and that's what we do, is we work together. What vision does the Okanagan Indian Band have for their lands? How can we roll that up into Vernon's vision? We have, as a mayor was saying, we have a piece of land, IR6, that sits right on the beach. Very significant part of the history of Vernon. And so significant that we signed a relationship accord in October of 2018 and had Grand Chief come up and be part of that. So we want to move forward, and we'll get to some initiatives that we've already decided that we have moved forward on, but I'm going to let Sheldon talk a little bit more here. And that's how it came about, just so you know. You have to, you know, it was a little bit of a start, but then we decided let's carry it on forward, and that's what we're doing right now. Councillor Louis.
Thanks, Mr. Mund. As Akbal had explained, you know, we have a very jaded history within the territory. And I think in order for us to have been able to really take the first step forward, we had to sit down and have some tough discussions, share some tough truths. I think our first meeting was in the city council chambers at the time when Akbal was still in the role of mayor. And we had some very uncomfortable discussions. We brought forward some very uncomfortable histories that, for us, are everyday life. I tend to joke around quite often, but even when I go home from my political role with OKIB, our house is always talking politics and history and the impacts that has had and that we still see to this day. And so I thank Akbal for bringing that forward, because as Indigenous people, we can't move forward until that hard truth and that impact that Canada has had and BC has had on our people. Until we can be aware of that, educate ourselves that, and acknowledge that that has played a significant role in our poverty, we will never be able to move forward, because we will still be on two separate sides of the line. In coming into this partnership, initially I wasn't there in the outset. Councillor Brewer was sitting in initially, and after our first meeting, I was asked to come and sit. And so I've been there now since pretty much the beginning, and my intent in sitting at that table is to really start off on the right foot. I think in the past, when we tried to come in and create relationships with Vernon, probably before me and Akbal were both sitting in our positions, it never seemed to really get off the ground. And I don't think that it wasn't for lack of trying on either side. I just don't think I think we were starting a little too far down the road in order to really have a significant relationship where we could move forward collectively. And so coming in, my intent was to share and educate on some of the histories that we have. And as the mayor mentioned, we have a number of reserves. Actually, one that just sits a couple kilometers down here that borders the city of Kelowna and Lake Country. And so we have IR number 1, which is our main reserve, which is about 10,000 hectares in Vernon, which is just on the west side of Okanagan Lake. We have IR 2 in Otter Lake, which is rather small, about 61 acres. We have a small Harris Reserve, the same thing, about 160 acres. We have IR4, which is the Swan Lake Reserve, which is on the north end of Swan Lake. And we've actually, as OKIB, we just recently created a group of companies to oversee our economic initiatives. This is something very new to us that we've just created this year. And this reserve, which is rather close, as well as the Kin Beach Reserve, the Priest Valley IR6 Reserve, border on either end of Vernon, which is the focal point for us at this moment. We are working to get to a land designation process for the Swan Lake in order to develop there as well. And so we also have Duck Lake down here. Now, just to give, I'm going to give a bit of context here real quick, because this is rather important, and I think this is a lot to do with why we never were able to move forward with Vernon. In the mid-1800s, around 1864, the Douglas Colonial Reserve was created with, I forget the reserve commissioners, Sprott, Shaw, and there was, this was actually, I think, the only reserve in BC where they brought in a third independent to sit on this committee to create reserves. And at the time this reserve was created, it was created exactly where Vernon sits today. The reserve would dissect Vernon, I believe, roughly where the Vernon Art Gallery is. It kind of dissects down towards the IR6, the Priest Valley Reserve, which is where we had first started our relationship with the city. And so given the history surrounded around where Vernon is situated and how Vernon came to be there, initially when the reserve was created in 1864, it was intended to give us ample lands to be able to economically strive. So we had a lot of very fertile lands, a lot of very deep, rich soil for agriculture at the time. And 3 years later, that reserve was clawed back. The entirety of what is now Vernon was taken from us without our consent. And what we were given in return was a small tract of land that goes kind of northwest on Highway 97 out towards Kamloops. And so we received a chunk of land that, in essence, has very little economic abilities to it. We can't really do much of it. Very arid, very rocky, very dry. And the location just was, there's not much you can do with it out there. And I think most of you know the drive to Kamloops, so there really isn't much out there. And so when we came in and sat down with the city council, as Akbal shared, we put this history out, and I had touched on how that displacement has really put us in the impoverished, one small piece of our impoverishment as we are today, is having those lands clawed back. After that, we had also had a reserve, which was the Commonage Reserve, which reached pretty much just a couple kilometers north of here. Went from Vernon, which is what we now see as Predator Ridge and that entire Okanagan Center, into Lake Country. Again, very, very wealthy lands to this day. And the history behind that is that the man who essentially Vernon is named for, its forefather, Forbes Vernon, had lobbied to the government at the time. And we are told that he had a very close relationship with one of the high-up members in government at the time, and he lobbied to them to say that, you know what, these Indians, they don't need this land. This would be better suited for farmlands for the settlers coming in. And so he was able to convince the government to, again, now claw back another very wealthy, very rich piece of land from our people, and for which both of these we are now in land claims trying to settle with the government. And so given that history that surrounds Vernon and Okanagan Indian Band, I think that, you know, on our side, because we know the history, there's a lot of animosity that's been carried through generations. And through Vernon not really fully understanding that history, there is a gap in understanding where we're coming from. And so without having that awareness, without having that education, there's that gap in empathy and understanding of why it is we struggle to succeed. And so coming in, and I use pretty much every table I'm at to initiate these types of discussions and education points, because everything we face, all the socioeconomic issues that we faced, are based upon the displacement and the basically the clawing back of the resources. Now, when we first came in and the reserves were created, the Canadian government had signed agreements, and that they said that they would manage our resources. And from the management of those resources, we would receive education, healthcare, housing, water, infrastructure, RCMP protection, a number of things that came into this as the first settlers were coming in. And as the years came in and more settlers came in, and the need for more fertile farmlands and crops came, the more we became displaced, the more we got clawed back, the less opportunities we started to have. Given the fact that the Indian Act itself would also not allow us to vote in what was, and what is still today, considered a democratic process, we were always excluded up until the 60s. We were not allowed to hire lawyers to come in and fight on our behalf. And so the systematic oppression is what brought us to where we are as an impoverished people. Now, now that I've kind of loaded you guys' minds up with a lot of different things here, we come to today now, and because we've had such a gap in services and programming, in funding, we need to rely on own source revenue in order to support our communities, to provide healthcare, housing. And so when the SETI initiative came in, our staff member at the time, Janelle Brewer, I believe she was acting ED, seen this as an opportunity because she also carries the economic development portfolio too, to start to, I guess, break free, and try to not necessarily forget those pasts, but bring them forward and learn from them. And so she applied for this SETI funding, and thankfully we were accepted. And since we have been in this relationship since October, and then signing the relationship accord, and then unraveling it in February in a public event where Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, the mayor, our city council, the Okanagan Indian Band councils, we came together and publicly signed a relationship accord. This is something that I think our two communities have needed for quite some time, because it outlines some very specific commitments that we're going to work towards. And I think the biggest one is the relationship, starting from ground zero and building up, and really creating an understanding of what it is that we need. Because I think we learned, and I think the city council learned, there are very, very different things on either side of our line. The city council, as we know, their economic driver is to draw people in so that businesses can strive. It's not city council's responsibility to provide housing and jobs, but on our side, as an Indian band, we have to play the role of a municipality, of the provincial government, and the federal government. We have to navigate those three and provide all these services. And so our economic driver is basic human needs. We need to make money to be able to support our families who don't have homes, our homes who don't have water, our infrastructure. And so when this came aboard, our chief, Byron Lewis, his big thing was, our water crisis that we are in. He looked at it as an opportunity that, hey, maybe we can mend fences here and be able to work together to create infrastructure for our community. The other big one was the wildfire management and emergency planning. And so those started off. We kind of reached for the stars, I think, right out the gate. And as we went through the process, we understood that, okay, maybe we need to dial this back a little bit. Let's look at something a little more attainable. And so we started creating the terms of reference for our group. We created a working group for the IR6, the Kin Beach property. And we really started to chisel it down, and let's start getting to, the bottom here again, because again, I think that's in the past where we lost our path in trying to create that relationship, as we shot for the stars too soon. It didn't work. We got frustrated with each other, and we would walk away. And so I think with then Mayor Akbal and our now Mayor Victor, we really said, look, we need some wins here. We need to show and prove that we can work together. And I think it was one of the biggest eye-openers, I think, that we kind of had, because after 150 years of oppression, we tend to want to jump. We need to catch up now and get shoulder to shoulder, but it's not that simple. And so we've dialed it back now, and we've looked to create some more attainable goals. And it is based around the education. It is based around letting the people of Vernon know who we are and that we've been here for X amount of time. And so we decided that when Victor came aboard, and we have the rail trail coming in, there were some great initiatives that were already happening around us. So why not jump in on those successes and build off of something that's already built? And rather than recreating the wheel, let's just, learn to work together. And incidentally, I sit at the rail trail with the tripartite group there. And so we're starting to really understand what's going on around us, how we can now fit in. Before, I don't think our community ever really envisioned ourselves as part of Vernon. And I think, and I got to mention it, I always do, is Juliet Cunningham, past council member, she made a very, very good comment about Vernon needs to be safe for its Indigenous people. The environment that was in that community for generations was not an environment that our people were able to strive in. Don't get me wrong, we have a number of our community members that are out succeeding outside of our community. I think, we struggle with trying to bring them back to community, though, because they don't feel welcome. And so when Juliet said we need to create a better community, I think all of us at that table really took her words to heart, and that is what we've been moving towards. And so the 3 initiatives that we've reached is that we are going to look to start including our Inskalukchin language and some educational pieces within the city on a small level, on renaming some of the traditional places that are within Vernon, giving our people a sense of now reclaiming their history, but also coming in and educating the city of Vernon that, this was this place before it was Main Street. This was this place before it was 30th Ave. This was this place before it was Polson Park. And so I think in coming in, and my hopes is that as we move forward through this, the idea that we had been here before Vernon starts to become more apparent, and it starts to become more welcomed. As we work together and the members from our community and the members from the city of Vernon start to see that we're working together at this level, my hopes is that everybody now becomes a lot more accepting of the histories, the good and the bad. And so I think that as we come in and move forward with this, these are going to start to open things up slower and slower. But I think that moving towards the tourism aspect that we're looking to support, because Vernon as well is looking to join that tourism initiative with the trails. I was glad to hear the lady before talking about trails and the community forests. Similar things have come up in our discussions, and so it's good to see that we are all actually seeing things in a similar way these days. So with that, I'll let Akbal kind of take over now, and I just wanted to give you that context, because without that, most people don't understand that importance of building relationship needs to start before you can even think of coming into a boardroom and hammering out business details. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Sheldon. Go ahead, please. I'm just going to give you where we're sitting now. We're creating a educational pamphlet with Okanagan Indian Band, and we're going to put this pamphlet in our tourists, in our museums, our arts gallery and whatnot, and it's the education piece that people can educate themselves on. One thing I learned long time ago, even before I met Sheldon, was First Nations always looked after air, okay, our water, our land, and the wildlife. That's what mattered to them. So if you can link those up, and what Sheldon said about they're more interested in what they need to survive rather than what they need the business to come in to make money off of it. That's what you look at. Those 4 items, you got to respect them, because without them, we all probably wouldn't be here. So, and with these protests going on with climate change, I guess you could relate them all back to those 4 items, right? If we don't look after them, we're going to be in a real dreadful situation. Another thing that we've done, and talked about the signage. Lake Country, as they developed their rail trail, had some signage out there. If you haven't seen it, you should probably go look at it. We're going to do the same on our northern end, create an Indigenous garden at mile 0, work back into Polson Park, which was a significant area for Okanagan Indian Band. You know, the rail trail, we've completed our portion from the city boundary back into the community, and we're going to finish off next year to link the north end and the Kin Beach area. So we'll have trails, which are very important, linking all our community. The Great Canal Trail, believe we have about 2 or 3 links left. One of the longest trails throughout our community, almost out to Lumbee, then around back on the west side. You know, it's a great trail, and we've been working on that for years too. So we understand the significance and how First Nations use the link between the lakes and how they use the trails to get around and survive. Another thing we are looking at, and this is where we signed the relationship accord, the Kin Beach, which was known by the kinsmen who had bought that property back in the 60s, I believe. Anyways, we're looking at renaming that to a significant name that involves First Nations, of course. Canoes used to paddle in there all the time, land on the beach, and that's how they would move their goods between Okanagan Lake and Cow Lake. And they'd travel across the town through the paths and use that corridor down there. We get a lot of people always say, you know, to us up in Vernon, why didn't you build on the lake? Why is your downtown in the middle of town? And I said, well, I wasn't around when we built the town, but I understand why it was built where it was, because it was right between both lakes. And, you know, you look at the other communities we have, Penticton, Kamloops, Samurai, everybody's on the lake. We're not, but that's okay. We're okay with it. We're between the lakes. I think what message we can leave you all is, if you work together, you'll grow together. And it's very important. You know, and I'm a guy from Vancouver, so I lived down there, and I moved up here in '93 to Vernon. And, you know, I played ball with a lot of First Nations friends over the years. I never saw them any different, but what I would lacked was the education on where they came from, what, you know, how it all relates back to the history. And that's what I was lacking. So, you know, even I was guilty of not knowing what they're looking for and how we get this moving forward. And when I became the mayor, that community forum, I used to come out of those all the time and go, are we actually going to do something? Or, you know, councils would talk, and, you know, we even got staff now participating in this. It's just not councils. We have park staff, we have operations staff, we have our community development officer, we have everybody dealing with, you know, Okanagan First Nations now. And that's what you need to do, is get everybody involved, because the expertise, everybody has their expertise. It lies with individuals. Get them to work as a team, and we can accomplish anything we want. And we're hoping that this relationship will continue to grow, and, you know, in the future that we see some growth. And I just want to congratulate them on their sewer program out to Spall, up the corridor of Swan Lake. Another significant win for Okanagan First Nations.
Just one more thing to add before we head off. I think Akbal touched on it, is the importance is that working relationship at the staff level. You know, with us, our staff is most of the time understaffed. And the city of Vernon, understanding the speed that they can work at the speed of business, whereas us, we have municipal, provincial, federal hoops to jump through, which sometimes for City of Vernon, an initiative might take a week, sometimes might take us 6 months. And so having those understandings at the staff level, creating those working relationships with staff are key, because at some point, we're going to probably need some of that assistance from Vernon staff to try to move things through the system, because we're always bogged down. And so also with us as elected officials, a lot of times we have a shelf life. And so if we're the ones carrying that relationship, and any one of us doesn't make it back to this position, that relationship now becomes, there's a chink in that armor. And so if you have staff that are working on a day-to-day basis, which we do now with Janelle Brewer and Kevin Poole, you know, having that honest day-to-day back and forth between staff is what's going to build the relationship, because it's those staff members that come to our tables and inform us and give us the briefing notes and give us the information so that we can make our informed decisions. So I really need to applaud staff in this relationship, because without them, I think we may have just been butting heads as we did in the past. And I also want to give a lot of credit to the SETI team and the Can-Do team, Marissa, Lawrence, and her cohort, Helen. Without them there to help mitigate that relationship and to be able to pull out some of the key points that we can both work together on, there's a good chance that we may have overlooked a lot of things. And I think that was probably a downfall in the past, is that not having someone there to facilitate that relationship. We probably never did see the commonalities before, where now we sit down, and even though we're only there to talk about one thing, and I think the mayor knows it, about 20 other things that tend to overlap now come onto the table, and we're like, oh, there's even more here that we have in common now. And we start to really understand just how much we have in common after that. And so the SETI team and the Can-Do team, they have been very instrumental in helping us make this work.
So thank you, everybody, for having us here. And Sheldon has to run, but I told Gord that I would hang around. If anybody has any questions, well, you can always. There's another fellow here from Vernon you can always ask too. But he's part of our SETI team as well, as Councillor Cunningham is retired. But you know, I'll hang around. So if you have any questions, please feel free.